Yom Yerushalayim Sameach Chag Sameach. It's wonderful to see everyone. Today, Baruch Hashem, is a big Yom Tov. It's an incredibly important and festive day. It also happens to be that today, once again, Kodesh Baruch Hu is challenging us with our ownership, with our appreciation of Yerushalayim and our Kodesh. Even as soon as just a few minutes ago, there was violence directed towards Jews, towards Chayalim, towards Klal Yisrael from the Makom HaMikdash, and that should, at the very least, on this very important and special day, give us a tremendous amount of pause and ask us to think very deeply within ourselves what our Kodesh Baruch Hu is trying to tell us, what our Kodesh Baruch Hu is asking of us. It's not a simple thing. It's certainly not something that we should be taking lightly. I suppose I'll begin. We're going to be discussing in a moment Maamarei of Kook that's recorded in Maamarei HaRaaya in the second chelek, which is probably the most comprehensive analysis that Rav Kook has on the concept of Yerushalayim Bichlal. But before we get there, we should just talk about Yom Yerushalayim. Of course, Rav Kook was not zocher to see Yom Yerushalayim. He was niftar in 1935. But Rav Nebenzahl, I saw this originally quoted from Rabbi Mati Greenberg Shlita, the previous Rosh Yeshiva and current Nasi HaYeshiva of Yeshivas Kerem Yavne, which I was zocher to attend. I saw him quoting Rav Nebenzahl has in his sichos on Sefer Shmos towards the end of the Sefer, and I didn't get a chance to get it for you guys. But Rav Nebenzahl points out that at least according to some of the calculations of some of the Amoraim and Rishonim, Yom Yerushalayim, Chavchet Be'iyar, what we are standing on today, has immense historical significance. Anybody heard this before? What massive, incredibly important Jewish history event happened on the first Chavchet Be'iyar after the Jewish people left Mitzrayim? So he says that this is the calculation according to Shittas Rav in the Gemara, that Chavchet Be'iyar was the date of the Milchama against Amalek, which is pretty cool. That's pretty wild when you consider that was the day that Moshe Rabbeinu went up to the top of the mountain, put up his hands, and the Jewish people won a natural and yet victorious, miraculous victory. Right? It was Moshe Rabbeinu was up on the mountain. That was nisim, that the hands of Moshe Rabbeinu could do milchama or not do milchama. That's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, well, what was going on there? Moshe Rabbeinu makes you win wars? No, when the Jewish people were fighting a natural war down below in the valley, when they looked up to Shamayim, they saw that Moshe Rabbeinu was being mechaben towards Shamayim. So then the Jewish people looked up to Shamayim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them strength. He gave us strength to be able to win the war, and that's the historical precedent, to a very significant extent, of everything that happened on Yom Yerushalayim all those years ago, which is not so long ago. I said this to my children while I was driving them to school this morning. I said to them, today's a very, very special day. Today's the day that the Jewish people got Yerushalayim back. So they said to me, when did that happen? I said, like 40-something years ago, right? That's 50-something years ago now. So they looked at me, they go, wow, that's so long ago. Right? That's forever ago. My kids are like, whoa. Dovi, my 6-year-old, he says to me, Abba, that's how many more years older is that than me? I'm like, well, Dovi, you're 6. Whoa. Right? Ancient history if you're a 6-year-old, but many of you here remember it. So Baruch Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has been mazakias to live in a dar that it is possible for us to visit Yerushalayim. It is possible for us to enjoy and experience Yerushalayim. Rav Neria writes that when Rav Kook first came to Yerushalayim, so when he was standing on the outskirts of the city, he arrived in Yafa, and he made his way to Yerushalayim eventually. And when he got to Hari Yehuda, so he taught Kriya. He taught Kriya because the Shulchan Aruch says that if you see Hari Yehuda b'chur banam, see the cities, the mountains of Yehuda in a state of destruction, a state of exile, you have to take Kriya there. And then when you got to Harabais, you taught Kriya again. You saw the Kosel, you taught Kriya again. Today, people don't take Kriya when we land in Ben Gurion. We don't take Kriya when you drive up to Yerushalayim. We take Kriya when we see the Makam HaMikdash. We see the Makam HaMikdash b'chur bana in its great state of despair and brokenness. So with Shualim Hilchu Vai, foxes are running around on Harabais ad hayom hazeh, that there are foxes running around on Harabais. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us that without war, without bloodshed, without any trauma, that we should be able to build the Beis HaMikdash without Shualim Hilchu Bo. We have the great schus that we do not tear kriya when we see Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim Baruch Hashem is built. Yerushalayim is gorgeous. Yerushalayim is state-of-the-art modern city, ready for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to help us to build the Beis HaMikdash, for us to build and for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring down from Shemayim all the vasachas that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us to do this. We have a lot to be thankful for today. We have a lot to be thankful for, but what we're about to see in Rav Kook is that what Yerushalayim is and what Yerushalayim is supposed to be is so much more. It is so much more, and to that end, we're not going to be able to see everything inside. But there's two sides to Yerushalayim that Rav Kook focuses on, and it is gorgeous and beautiful for us to be able to see this inside. And to that end, we're gonna take a look inside of this Maamer of Rav Kook in Maamarei HaRaaya, starting from the second page, really, rather than the first. Where he writes as follows, and we'll make this a little bit bigger so that it's a little bit easier for Chavra to see. That should do it. So Kook explains to us like this. He says, "Shtei matanos tovos," this paragraph over here. "Shtei matanos tovos nishtalmu lanu b'mlu'an miYerushalayim." There are two great gifts that we get in totality from being in Yerushalayim, from Yerushalayim being in its perfect state of being. We have Ir Mikdash Melech, the city of the transcendency of Malchus. Ga'on HaKodesh Gvuras HaChayil. The Ga'on HaKodesh, the pride of Kedusha, and Gvuras HaChayil, which is the strength of might, of protection, and of being people that are sovereign. He says, Me'es asher charva irenu, and from the day that our city was destroyed, v'shamein beis mikdashenu, and the Beis HaMikdash was taken away from us, v'nutal kvay mi beis chayenu, and the honor was taken from the house of our lives, nishkechu lanu shnei ma'aros halalu. We have lost both of these essential ingredients. Ga'on HaKodesh chadal tat es kochai. The Ga'on HaKodesh, the great splendor of the Jewish people, has been denigrated. It has been lost. We no longer have that power. What is this Ga'on HaKodesh? The splendor that comes from Ga'on HaKodesh, from being part of a transcendent nation. So that's Or HaNevuah HaElokis Hu'am Ruach HaKodesh Pasak V'chashakim halachnu nadidim bagoyim. Nevuah has been stripped away from us. Ruach HaKodesh has ceased. And darkness has accompanied us as we have wandered nomadically amongst the nations of the world. That's the Ga'on HaKodesh. Now, in order to understand what this means, Ga'on HaKodesh, the genius that comes from Kedusha. So we should point out, we've seen this from Rav Kook in a number of places. Rav Kook touches upon this in a number of ways, is that there is an immense value to that school of thought that we lost out on since the Churban, which is the school of thought of Nevuah. And that was the decision, we've learned this before, that was the decision of the Anshe Knesset Agdala to tighten the faucet in the world of Nevuah, because that was no longer, those aspirations were no longer things that we could appreciate. But it all emanated ultimately from Yerushalayim. And the way to think about this in a I suppose in shorter way as possible, is that there's certain realities that we'll talk about the general structure of knowing things. There are certain things that we know, right? Certain things that I know, right? I know that these sunglasses are black. That's the thing that I know. I know that. And then there are things that I know that I don't know. I know that I don't know, Baal Peh, what the 20th digit of pi is. I know that I don't know that. Something that I know exists, I just know that I don't know that. And then there are things that I don't even know that I don't know. Right? The things that you know, the things you know you don't know, and the things that you don't know that you don't know. Right? There's a whole world. I couldn't even say what they are because I don't even know that I don't know them. Right? There's like all sorts of things in the world that I don't know. I don't even know what I don't know about them. It's just lots of things I don't know. But then there's a whole world. And this is essential for us to understand, especially in the life and times and mind and thought of Kook, is that there's a whole world of things that we don't know that we know. There's things that we don't know that we know. Those things, we'll say very simply, those things that we don't know that we know, that's called culture. That's called culture. We don't know why we know them. You don't even know that you know them, but you know them. For example, pashtus is that you eat with a knife and fork. Why? Why do you eat with a knife and fork? No one knows. I mean, you can figure it out. But in the Far East, they eat with chopsticks. They think we're meshuggah for using a fork. We think they're meshuggah for using. I mean, today, Baruch Hashem, everybody does. Multicultural. But what's pshat? Meaning, in China today, in Japan today, even when there's knives and forks available, for all the foods that they have, they use chopsticks. And by us, unless you're eating sushi, you use a knife and fork. That's just the way that we are. That's part of our culture. Which means that there is this underlying basis of things that we know, things that we have as part of our experiential, intellectual reality that we don't have good reason for, we don't have good explanations for, we just know that we know them. These are things that are referred to by the Torah as, anybody know what's the word the Torah uses for this? I'm going to tell it to you, and then you're going to go, taka. You know what this is called? Chukim. That's called the chak. Things that we do, the reason of it doesn't make too much of a difference to us. It's part of who we are. Now, if you are a Jew living in America in 2021, Tavshin Pei Aleph, and people want to know, Rabbi, why do we keep Shabbos? So why do we keep Shabbos? Okay, I can suggest reasons for why we keep Shabbos. Why do we not eat Pasuk B'chalav? I can suggest reasons we don't eat Pasuk B'chalav. Why do we not wear shatnez? I can suggest reasons we don't wear shatnez. And all of the Svarim are replete with many of these things, but at the end of the day, these things are chukim. They're chukim. They're things that we don't know. We don't know. Meaning the tam, the reason for this is nistar. It's hidden from us. We don't understand. Now, that doesn't mean that it's unintelligible, but it means that in order to understand these things, you have to be thinking b'chachmas Hashem, which is not the normative way that we rationally, as human beings, think about things. We think about things with reason and with rational thought. That's how we process information. One has to be in the world of Chachmas Habareh in order to understand the reasons for shatnez and the reasons for Basar B'chalav and the reasons for tefillin. We don't know what these things are, but we do them. We do them. Now, the more culturally Jewish you are, the more you are comfortable with doing those kinds of things, right? Which is why when we ask if somebody is frum, what does frum mean colloquially? We don't ask if you are honest on your taxes, though that's very important. We don't ask if you give tzedakah. It's very important. We don't ask about kibbud avayim. We don't ask about lashon hara. What do we ask about? Somebody frum means Shabbos, kashrus, taras, mishpacha. Shabbos, kashrus, and taras, mishpacha, none of them have good reasons, at least to our rational minds. So these are all cultural phenomena. These cultural phenomena are things that the more that you are part of Jewish culture, the more normative and the more sensible these things become and are. And if you're far outside of Jewish culture, they make zero sense whatsoever. It is impossible to appreciate what Shabbos, Kashrus, and Taras Mishpacha is. If you've never heard of it before, you've never seen a Jewish community, you've never lived there before. These things look like hocus pocus, heebie-jeebie. Nobody would understand what any of that means. Masha Enken, what would certainly be true about being a moral, ethical, employer or employee. Those are things that we do understand through our rational minds. That's something that we can appreciate. They're not cultural. The Torah instructs us, as Parshas Acharamos, is that we have to be very careful to ensure that the culture, the bedrock of the way that we understand the world, is Torah. That's bedrock of how we understand the world, which is why the Torah instructs us in Parshas Acharamos that there is a prohibition against doing chukas hagoyim. What's chukas hagoyim mean? It means the things that non-Jews do that have no good reason. There's lots of those things. There's lots of things that are done in the non-Jewish world that have no good reason. I don't want to, pop anybody's celebrations for the 4th of July, but why is it that Americans make a barbecue and light fireworks on the 4th of July? So there's a reason. But why do people do it? People don't do it because of the reason. People do it because that's what we do. That's what people do. That's the thing that is done. What's the reason? It's fun. I don't know, so it's bungee jumping. I don't know. So, but that's not the minhag. The minhag is that people have a barbecue and light fireworks. That's how you celebrate the 4th of July. And then you wonder why. What is at the core of that? Now, I'm not saying that it's also, speak to Paisik, right? I'm not saying that that's also, I don't want to get in trouble. I'm not saying that that's also, but we have to understand that that's a chok. That's something that we do and we don't know why we do it. So the Ramah writes, that chukas hagoyim means things that non-Jews do that we don't understand why they are doing it. Maybe they don't understand why they're doing it. I'm sure you can always figure out, right? But what that means is that is bedrock of society. It's just people understand that that's a normal thing to do, like eating with a knife and fork. Right? Now, eating with a knife and fork is also not also, it's utilitarian. But why knife and fork as opposed to chopsticks? That's interesting, right? That's an important and interesting sociological, psychological, anthropological thing to try to discuss and try to understand. But when the Jewish people is Shurim Alad Masam, when the Jewish people are in Eretz Yisrael and Migdash Melech Ir Melucha and Yerushalayim is where it's supposed to be, so then what we have the ability to tap into is Chochmas Hashem, the ultimate bedrock understanding of all of Torah Hashem. That ultimate bedrock understanding of what all of Torah Hashem is becomes accessible as part of our culture. It becomes like normal. It's normal. It's normal that a person would have understandings of Yedias Hashem because that's part of the culture. Because it's part of, you breathe it when you walk out in the street. Like I think it was the Kashas Magid that said that the average farmer, like the average, barley farmer, crop sharer, in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, had more Hasagas Elokus than all of the Amoraim. It just understood much more because it's part of the culture. We understand Yiddishkeit. Our Yiddishkeit is I've mentioned this many times. This is paradigmatic to the Torah of Kook. Our Yiddishkeit is people of the book. People of the book is the biggest insult in the world. We were never supposed to be people of the book. We were never supposed to have a religion. We're supposed to be a nation with a culture. A nation with a culture, that's not called people of the book. That's called people of the land. People of the book, Chalila. This is what we say in Kinos. On Tisha B'Av, Ve'ein shir raka Torah zos. The only thing that's left is Torah. Chman al-Itzlan. All that we have left is Torah. We weren't supposed to only have Torah. We're supposed to have Zray, Moed, Nashim, Zikin, Kachim, and Taras. And we're all supposed to be things that were legatic, things that were alive, things that were part of who we are and what we did and how we understood the world. And so Rav Kook says to us that what we lost in losing Yerushalayim was the bedrock of our capacity to live in a culture where Chachmas Hashem is our chok. That's called Ga'oin HaKodesh, literally Ga'oin, the pride, but Ga'oin also means genius. It means that the way that we thought about the world was based on a bottom basement level of a culture which was inspired by Ruach Hashem. Which means that Ruach HaKodesh was possible. And like the Rambam writes that if a person would be in a state of Ruach HaKodesh, then they would be able to achieve Nevuah. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu deigned that they would be able to speak. He wanted to speak to them. So then they had a message that Hashem thought that was appropriate to share with that person. So Hashem would speak to them within that state of Nevuah. I'll share with you more than that. I mentioned this. This is a gorgeous Meshech Chachma also in Parshas Achrimaz, the Meshech Chochmah writes that the Jewish people, even those that were not in a meditative state of Ruach HaKodesh, when they would come to the Beis Hamikdash on the Shalosh Regalim, so the Mishnayos described that they would open up all of the doors and all of the curtains, and you could see from the Azara all the way through into the Kodesh HaKodashim. You could see the Kruvim, you could see the Aron Kodesh inside of the Kodesh HaKodashim in Yerushalayim. And when a person would see that, it would be possible to be overwhelmed with the Ruach HaKodesh such that they would be able to achieve Nevuah almost like Bavas Achas, it would just like hit them. He says, you know who that happened to? Yonah ben Amitai, the Meshech Chochmah writes, Yonah ben Amitai was zocher to Nevuah even though he wasn't ready for it, which is why he ran. He was like, I'm not ready for this. I'm not supposed to be having Nevuah now. I wasn't in a state of Ruach HaKodesh. This is one big mistake. I'm not ready for this. And he bolted. He got out of there. Because he wasn't prepared for that. Chazal tell us he was part of the Olei Regalim. He came up to Yerushalayim. He saw into the Kodesh HaKodashim, and he was inspired by Ruach HaKodesh because Baruch Hu spoke to him there. That's what it means to be in a place that's overwhelmed with Kedusha. That's Gaon HaKodesh. All of that cultural basis of our society is gone. It's gone. That intuition, right? That I think that this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to be thinking. I think that this is the correct thing to do. That doesn't exist without Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. That's one. That's the first thing that we've lost. Which, once you've heard that that's the first thing that we've lost, yeah, you wonder, what else is left? So it's v'chasheichim halachnu nodim b'goyim. We are wandering around in darkness amongst the nations of the world. And then he says, Gvuras hachayil chadla. The Gvuras hachayil chadla, and our strength has disappeared. Gam hi lu'mazeh, which is also in correspondence to the loss of Yerushalayim. Nisdaldel koichenu. Our strength, our physical strength, has been sapped, and we are wandering around like shadows in a strange land. Now, we have to understand that what Rav Kook is speaking about here is ultimately what the vision of Vatem Tiyulu Mamlechas Kohanim V'Goy Kodesh was supposed to be. Like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to say to us again, just before Matan Torah, that we are supposed to not just be people that are inspired and infused with Ruchnias and Torah Hashem, but that we are supposed to have strength and sovereignty such that we can educate all of humanity to this, which requires us to be physically strong, to have a sense of prowess and pride and presence in the world. Not just that we're going to be monks in a mountain, Rahman al-Islam, not connected in any way, shape, manner, or form to the day-to-day ongoing reality of humankind, but that we're supposed to be able to inspire humanity, and that means that we need to be physically strong. We need to be able to have a sense of physical capacity, because without that physical capacity, then we're just like neshamas stuck up in Shemaim. That's not what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to bring it down, to be able to translate all of that into the Olam HaAsiyah, into the world of activity, the world of action, the world of practical day-to-day doing. And without the ability to bring it into the practical day-to-day doing, because we are sapped of our strength. So without that, Nizdaldel Kachenu, our strength has disappeared. And what we have left is the shell of a people that are stuck in Batei Medrash in order to appreciate and achieve anything. This point, by the way, is made strongly by the Maharsha in Maseches Brachos. You might be familiar with the famous tefillah of Rav Alexandri. Usually this is quoted around Pesach time. It's one of the primary sources to what we understand the Yetzer Hara is compared to Chametz, or Chametz is compared to the Yetzer Hara. Rav Alexandri says, "Ritzaneinu la'aseh shetzanechol mi ma'akev, sa'or shebe'isa v'shibud malchios." Right? Sa'or shebe'isa, we want to do what Hashem wants us to do. What's preventing us from doing this? Sa'or shebe'isa means the yeast in the dough. That's the Yetzer Hara. V'shibud malchios, and the pressures of being subjugated by the nations of the world. Sa'or shebe'isa v'shibud malchios. So the Maharsha points out in the Chidusha Haggadah, at the back of Maseches Brachos, so sorry Shiba Is v'Shiba Malchios. Well, what's the effect of that? So he says what the Yetzer Hara does is it makes us feel proud for the wrong reasons and ashamed for the wrong reasons. And the same is true about the nations of the world. Why? Because a person is supposed to feel within themselves a deep sense of humility, right? Va'anochi afer va'efer, but a deep-centered pride for being part of the Jewish people. We're supposed to be proud of being a Jew, and we're supposed to feel anochi, me as a private individual, afer va'efer. I'm like Rav Kook used to sign his letters, Eved la'am kadosh be'eretz hakodesh. I'm a servant to a holy nation in the Holy Land. But a servant. We learned this when we were learning the Einayah about David HaMelech. That David HaMelech felt that he was an Eved. He was an Eved to Klal Yisrael, and that's what gave him strength. Was to understand his role. The Yetzer Hara says, "Nah, you don't need them. You're good enough all by yourself. You're self-sufficient. You can do whatever you want." That's what the Yetzer Hara does. It puffs us up. That's the Sa'ar Sheba Isa. What does the Shibud Malchios do? You dirty Jew. Let's throw rocks at you from Harabais. Right? Hate you, dirty Jew. So what happens is misplaced pride. Is that the Yetzer Hara and the Umas Ha'olam work in tandem to allow us to misplace the pride that we're supposed to have for being a Jew, and instead we think about, look at me, right? I can be a big Balgaiva even though I do lots of averos, right? So I puffed up for the wrong reasons and downtrodden for the wrong reasons. It's all hafuch. The whole thing is fakert. So the strength that we're supposed to have is pride for being a Jew. Look at me. I'm a Jew. I'm a proud Jew, which of course was the beauty that the original settlers of the land of Israel in the 10s and 20s and 30s, while Rav Kook was there building up the land, and the whole world was saying, "Why are you talking to these osvav good for nothing Chiloni Jews?" Right? They don't want to keep Torah mitzvahs. Rav Kook was saying, "No, but what they have is strength and pride. They have pride." You guys in the Beis Medrash, you are reaching for Ga'oin Yaakov. You're Ga'oin HaKodesh. You're reaching up for the worlds of Kedusha. What they are reaching for is strength, is physical strength, that the Jewish people should be tachlis, that we should have an impact on the world. And what we are missing without Yerushalayim are both of these things. And so he writes as follows. He says, Shtei matanos, Elokiyos halalu, these godly capacities, these godly presence, these gifts, hakedusha v'hagvura, transcendence and strength, she'ein kate lezivon v'sifartan, there is no end to their shine, their beauty, their transcendence, and their glory. B'yosan mushulavoshtehen yachdav, that when they are together, when they are conjoined, when they are part and parcel of the same thing, the power is immeasurable. The shine, the light, the glory of it is immeasurable. He says, "Natku zu mizu," you break them apart. V'chol echa bifnei atzma, and each one by itself. Nisdaldela dildul achar dildul. It is broken apart, step by step, one from another. Both the Ga'on HaKodesh has dived, and the strength of the Jewish people has totally fallen apart. Ad asher macheshas hagolus haminuveles, micheshas hagolus haminuveles, nidbeku banu tumas kfiras elokim tachas Ga'on HaKodesh, v'rash lanus u'merech leiv tachas gvuras hachayil. This is the tragedy of the Jew in Galus. What has happened to us as a result of being in exile is as a result of the darkness of being part of a culture that is not inspired with a bottom basement level of Kedusha as part of our natural state of being. We have now become susceptible to the Tumas Kfiras Elokim, to the impurity of the denial of Hashem. Why? Because if you're not part of a Jewish community, you will never understand what Shabbos is. If you're not part of a Jewish community, you will never understand the value of sitting around a Shabbos table and singing Zmiros. It's impossible. If you've never seen it, it cannot be described in a way that anybody would ever want to do it. They say that there's all the Hasidic Meisters of like people wanting, like people that were not part of the tzibur, trying to like enjoy Shabbos food. You try to convince a non-Jewish friend and neighbor that has never heard about cholent to understand why Jews go meshuga for cholent. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. At the end of the day, cholent is like cheap leftovers, right? If you don't get it, you don't get it. You don't get what cholent is. You don't get what cholent is. Like there's chevra on this Zoom that understand that there is nothing greater than, like, the highest Gan Eden Ha'elyon is a piece of herring and a little bit of scotch on Shabbos morning. Like, that's Gan Eden Ha'elyon. You don't understand that if you don't understand that, right? Or we joke with Rabbi Goldberg that at the end of every fast, I hope he'll forgive me for sharing this. At the end of every fast, he says all that you need is a Danish and a cup of coffee, and you can have another fast, right? That's all you need. That's all you need. At the end of the time, it's a Danish and a cup of coffee, and then life goes on, gewalt, everything. But if you don't know, there's no way of describing that. There's no way of describing this. I told my wife when we got married that my Zaidi was a chazan in South Africa, so he would come home from shul every Shabbos morning smelling like scotch and herring. And my grandmother would get upset with him. So my wife said to me, "No, so why are you telling this to me?" I said, "Well, I have a minhag. That's not what we got to do, right? I have a minhag. I have to come home." And she said, "Then I have a minhag that I have to get upset with you." So that's Kodesh. I mean, we're being facetious about this, but you understand that if you don't understand what it is, then it disappears. It's why, and we'll just say this in a very prati way. If you would ask any Jewish child, at any point in time of the year, what's that last matzah that we eat on Seder night? What's that called? Everybody knows that's afikomen. And how many cups of wine do you drink? We drink 4 cups of wine. And how many questions? There's 4 questions. And which way do you lean, to the left or to the right? Well, Pashit, you lean to the left. You understand that any kid could answer those questions if you've been to a Seder like once or twice. 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, right? If they understand right from left, they know that you lean to the left. But imagine somebody that had never heard of Judaism, they never heard of a Seder, to like know that detail off the top of their head. Impossible, right? If you would ask a kid from the first Beis Hamikdash, whether a sheretz makes a sheretz is an avatuma, what will it do to Adam v'Kelim, and what will it do to Eichlin and Mashkim? So like now you have to like chaza like Gemaras and Mishnayos. Every kid in the first Beis Hamikdash could tell you those dinim. It was part of who they were. It was part of their culture. It was part of their world. That was what Kedusha was. That was what Tahara was. Everybody understood that without that Nizdaldel, Ruach HaKodesh, it's gone. We're not part of that culture. On the flip side, what else has happened is because we don't have that, we have Kfira in its place. Because if you cannot see Kedusha, so then you deny that it exists. And on the side of strength, what we have supplanted that with is Rash Lanus Umerech Levav Tachas Gvuras Achayel, is a sense of despondency and weakness. This is what Rachmana litzlan, people that survived the Holocaust and came to Eretz Yisrael, said, we don't want to ever go back to being sheeps going to the slaughter. Now, that phrase was taken to an extent that was not true. There were many Jews that fought back. But when Jews fought back, it was like almost a chiddush. It was almost a chiddush. Jews were not fighters. We had strong ideas and very passionate about a lot of very beautiful things. But for a Jew to stand up physically to oppression was not something that we did well in the 1,000 years of European exile. Sephardi Jewry was a little better at this. But also, not what we have now in Medinat Yisrael hasn't existed since Bar Kochva. That's very obvious. That's Pashut. Because in the place of Gvuras Achayil, what Golos does to us is Rash Lanus Merech Levav is like this weakness of heart and a sense of despondency, of the inability to do anything. That's why when Rav Kook first told the Bachram in the Yeshiva Ketanis in Yerushalayim, he told the guys, the Rebbeim that the boys have to be able to go outside and play ball. They have to be able to run around. They have to be physically strong. If you're going to be in Eretz Yisrael, you have to be physically strong. They laughed at him. They thought he was a kaifer. Telling guys that they should run around and exercise. Sit and learn. Sit and learn. That's all that you need. Now, Baruch Hashem, it's makubal that people need to exercise. Right? Especially young people, they need to exercise. Because without that, you become weak. Chalila, that the Jewish people should be weak. All of that is missing because what we don't have is the unity of Gon HaKodesh and Gvuras HaChayil. She says, these two very bitter deficits, these bitter blemishes on us. They come, they accompany us. And they consume us in the land of our enemies. And when we return from the land of the swords of our enemies, and the light of rebirth, of renewal, of Tchias HaMesim will shine upon the Jewish people once again. With a light that cannot yet disperse all of the shadows. And they come together with the Arpalei Tahar, which of course Rav Kook named the Sefer, Arpalei Tahar, with dark clouds of purity, of the resurrection of the spirit of our national building and getting together. He says, Tumas HaKfir v'atimtum ma'aver mizeh v'arashlanus u'marech halev me'ever mizeh v'yafitzu b'kirbenu machalos shanos. He says, what happens when even the smallest light of the Jewish people's reunification, of Kedusha and strength, of Kedusha and Gvura, of Go'in Yaakov and Gvuras HaChayil, when all of that comes together, even a little bit of that, it cannot get rid of all the shadows. But what happens is the stronghold of Kfira begins to wane, and the weakness of heart begins to wane. He says, because these two big avos hatuma, these two massive sicknesses of the inability to have a Jewish ruchnius culture and the weakness of our physical bodies that we have inherited from being in exile, they're not part of who we are. He says, they have been so part of our life for 2,000 years. He says, he says, we have a great bracha. We have a great bracha that it has been a little bit easier to get rid of the sickness. I'm rushing here because we want to get to the next point very quickly. It's to our great bracha that we have been able a little bit to dispel the tumah that comes with not having Jewish culture, because at least we've had Torah. But the sickness of the weakness, the physical weakness of the Jewish people, that has been very challenging. That's been much more challenging. He says, "V'hanegum barash lanus uvemerach oid nikorim bahem simanei hachaim shel gaon hakodesh imam nam b'shnehem rak etzlale hachaim anu anachnu roim." He says, and even though it's been so difficult, we can see a little bit. We can see a little bit already, even within the world of Jewish weakness, that we're coming back strong. Aval lamrois marois negaim halalu lo chadla nishmas elokim chaim chay bekirbenu lifol espul asa. But the nature of a Jew, the nature of a Jewish soul, to scream out that both of these things should be unified in one place, to inspire Kedusha and Tara amongst the Jewish people, all of those things are still part and parcel of who we are. So he says that the very first life-giving force, it's scattered and it's problematic, our march back. He says, this began in the old Yishuv. He says, but they were still weak. These are the Talmidim of the Gra and the Baal Shem that made Aliyah. They were bringing the Gaon HaKodesh, but they were very weak. They were on their way to Ruach HaKodesh. And then he says, the new Tchiyah, מינה איזה נצוסי חיים של אויז, אבל לא יכלה להכחיד את הרקב הפנימי, המחלה את זה שמבלעדיו לא יסוכל לנו כל עצמם רוח ליתן פריות נבוא את גאון הקודש. It says, and the new Yishuv has been unable in his time to become strong with Gaon HaKodesh. And effectively, this is how Rav Kook views the two sides of the Jewish people right now. And it's still true today, although we're even closer. Is that on the one hand, you have the Talmidei Chachamim that are fighting for Kedusha, and on the other hand, you have Chilonim that are building up the land. And eventually, when we put these two together, this is Yerushalayim Habnui Ki Ir Shechuvra LaYachdav. This is ultimately the meeting of heaven and earth, the meeting of Yerushalayim Shalmala, Yerushalayim Shalmata. That's the ultimate Yom Yerushalayim that Rav Kook was yearning for, that we are yearning for. We should be Zachar this Yom Yerushalayim. And all future Yemei Yerushalayim, Chodesh Baruch Hu should help us. We will be Zachar to the Geula Shlema Amitis, Bimher B'Ameinu, and then all of the tzaras that are happening on Har HaBayis today. Chodesh Baruch Hu should help us. V'chol HaRisha Kula Ki Ashan Tichleh Ki Savir Memshalas Zoden Min HaAretz. Yom Yerushalayim Sameach. For those that would like to see the rest of this piece, happy to send it along. Enjoy.
Shakach, thank you very much, Rabbi Blumenthal. We now have this chas of concluding the kola with a shir from Rabbi Zilberman.